I'm shielding myself with an attorney.
Always a good idea. I recommend it.
Good evening. Thank you so much for showing up tonight. We'd like to go ahead and start this meeting. Basically, tonight is Wicomico County's capital improvement plan for 2018 to 2022. And we're here tonight to basically hear from the public as to what you all feel that we should put in additionally to what we've got. We've got some major points on the last slide. We've got some major points of what we are including in there. So before anybody jumps the gun, just make sure we got to the last page first, so, and then we'll go from there. But I'd like to introduce Wayne Strasburg, Director of Administration. Leslie is the Finance Director, Leslie Lewis. Paul Wilbur is the County Attorney, and Weston Young from Department of Public Works. So Wayne, if you'll start, I appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. And thanks for being here tonight. Just by way of background, the Capital Improvement Plan is a 5-year planning tool. It's clear to understand that it's not an authorization to spend. It's a planning tool. It allows the county executive and the county council to take a 5-year forward look at what our major capital needs are going to be so that we can put those in context with our authorized or our appropriated spending for the coming year. So in that regard, the first year in the CIP 5-year schedule is the most important year, because that's the year that we will then, through the budget cycle, appropriate funds for projects that have been approved. So let's review real quickly what a capital project means within the scope of the capital improvement plan. The building of a public structure or the renovation of an existing public structure, including the related preliminary studies and surveys, the acquisition of property of a permanent nature for public use, the purchase of major equipment for any public betterment or improvement. Go to the next slide. This is a cycle that we go through. In September, early October, our departments submit to the county executive's office and to planning and zoning what their requests are for capital projects for the next 5-year cycle. We meet with each one of those departments through the months of October and November, sort through the requests. Then we meet with the public to receive public input, and then the executive will submit the capital improvement plan to the county council. This year, that submission will take place at the December 20th county council meeting. The council then has a period of time during which they review the capital plan, call in departments that they may want to speak with, get clarification on various projects. The county council has the authority to authorize the proposed projects, to delete proposed projects, or to lower the scope of work and or cost of a project. At the point in time that the county council then approves the capital improvement plan as modified, if it's modified, we then go into the budget cycle. And in the budget cycle, we include the costs of the projects that are proposed for the upcoming budget year. So that's really the first spending authorization that we have. And we would spend either through what's called pay-go, using current year revenue or savings, if you will, from our reserves, or we go out in the fall and we borrow money. But the first cut is even though a project may be included in the capital improvement plan, it may not make its way through the appropriation process in the budget process, in the operating budget process. So it's important to understand that then when you see the final capital improvement plan as proposed, it doesn't necessarily mean that the spending in that plan is ultimately going to be approved. We fund our projects essentially three different ways. Bonds, we go to the bond market, as I mentioned, typically in the fall. We will bond projects that have a life of at least 15 years because the life of the project has to match the financing period. So if there's a project that has a usable life of less than 15 years, we're not going to borrow money in the bond market to fund that project. That doesn't make fiscal sense. So we would fund a project like that either through PAYGO, which, as I said earlier, is using the county's current revenue or savings, or if you go to the next page, we do receive grant funding from the state and federal governments. That is particularly important for a couple of our operations. The airport, for instance, receives significant federal funding, and to a lesser extent, it receives funding from the Maryland Aviation Association as well. We have three enterprise accounts, the airport, tourism, and solid waste. And by enterprise, we mean that those operations, through their own generation of revenue, fund their operation. They don't receive appropriations from the general fund. In other words, property tax, income taxes do not go to support the operation of those entities. Next slide. So the county charter limits the amount of debt. So I said that we went to the bond market. We did $20.3 million in bonds this past fall. We took out a 15-year amortization schedule. Our true interest cost was 2.089%. We're limited to how much we can borrow really in two ways. The first is a charter debt limit, and it's 3.2 of the assessable real property base plus 8% of the assessable base of personal property. Our debt limit as of June 2016 was approximately $215 million. Our outstanding debt is $109 million, so we're right at around 51% of our debt limit. Further, however, our internal policy on debt service, in other words, the principal and interest payments that we make each year, is limited to 12% of the annual operating budget. So for the current fiscal year 17, our principal and interest payments are $13.7 million. That represents approximately 10% of the operating budget. That policy is very interest rate sensitive. So to the extent that interest rates are low, it gives you breathing room with the amount of principal that you can borrow because you've got a low interest payment. As interest rates rise, it's going to restrict your ability to borrow because your interest cost is going to be going up. So it's important to bear that in mind. So we have two limitations on the amount of money that we can go out and borrow. Future debt capacity, while the charter would allow substantially higher debt, the P&I policy effectively limits that total borrowing. We have a practice of issuing relatively short-term debt, 20 years. I don't recall us going past 20 years in the past 5 cycles, and as I said, this past year we went 15 years. This slide, it's a little hard to read, but I think the important thing, look at the first year, which is the current year that we're in right now, and you'll see that the total capital improvement budget was $49.5 million. And of that $49.5 million, 38.1 million is associated with public safety and with education. So that's 77% of this current year's capital improvement plan is associated with public safety and education. The next slide will show you that over the next 5 years, you're going to see that our payoff of debt is extremely rapid. It drops very quickly, particularly from 19 through fiscal year 23. So we will begin to have some breathing room, if you will, with the amount of debt, additional debt that we could take on, principally starting around 2021. Next slide. So this is, I think, what a lot of you would be interested in. We wanted to give you an idea of what the largest capital requests are that we received through that process that we went through in September, October. And we really limited to those projects that were of a cost of $250,000 or more. There's a lot more that you're going to see in the CIP other than these, but these are the ones where we've got pretty significant chunks of money associated. So the Board of Education is $13.5 million. That is not unusual. Approximately 70% of our outstanding debt is associated with the Board of Education. Yes, sir?
Repeat that, 70%?
About 70%, Joe, yeah. Runway extension. I don't know whether you followed this in the media or not, but Piedmont Airways is transitioning their fleet from the current turboprops to regional jets, Embraer 145s. And that particular airframe requires a longer runway to get off the ground. They can land easily, but to get off the ground, particularly in the hotter months with a full load, they need 7,000 feet of runway. So to add the 600 feet that we have to add is about $6 million. Public Works has to open a new landfill cell. That's $5 million. That will be funded through the enterprise account. That won't come out of the general fund. We are proposing to bring public water to the airport campus because in order to really further develop the airport campus, you have to have fire suppression, and for a hangar that is 10,000 feet or more, you have to have sprinkler service, and the only way to really do that effectively is with public water. The city and the county have agreed to amend our water and sewer plan to provide that service if the county can find the money to run the main line. We have parks and rec projects. This is fairly typical of about $2.2 million. We're proposing the final phase of the West Side Collector. Our detention center needs a new roof. It's $1.3 million. To complete our emergency management radio project, which is it's running close to an $18 million project, is another $750,000. We're proposing the next step in the new public safety building for the sheriff and emergency management. That would be $600,000 this year. We're proposing reconstruction of the road across Barron Creek, utilizing the culvert system and that would allow fish passage. That is what got the most support when we first met with the state after the storm. The detention center also needs new showers throughout the entire facility, and this is one of those things that's really mandated by the feds and by the state. There's been a lot of federal regulation, in particular, that mandates separation of detainees, and mandates also the conditions in which our detainees are housed. So those are the big tranches, if you will, of money. As I said, we have many, many others, but I think that gives you a flavor for where the significant amount of money is going to go. That's about 35 million right there on that one, excuse me, on that one page. So with that, we're really here to listen to what your thoughts are, what your questions are, what your input might be.
Can you go back?
Sure. What page you want to look at, Joe?
The runway extension, isn't that going to be funded by FAA, part of it, or all of it?
We will eventually get the money back from the FAA. The situation that we're in, Joe, is that we probably would not begin to receive, we have $1 million a year entitlement from the FAA, but that is already spoken for with existing approved projects. So our first repayments would be about 5 years out. So this is really forward funding at this point in time. So the county would, at least the working model is the county would provide a bridge loan to the airport that would then be repaid starting about 5 years out at $1 million a year.
$5 million for the landfill sale. I thought we had been setting money aside for that.
That's going to be paid. That's going to be paid for by solid waste. That's not come. That's.
Was there anything up there that's not going to be borrowed in this capital improvement budget other than that?
We would not borrow the $5 million for the sell. Right now, Joe, I don't believe, and again, we've got to do a bit more math, but I don't believe that we would borrow the $6 million for the runway extension. We're looking at some other alternatives, and not to get too deep in the weeds, but you'll recall that in each of the last 3 years with our bond sale, we have received what's called bond premium, and that bond premium has built to about $6.4 million. That bond premium has to be spent over a period of either spent over a period of 3 years from when it was first received, or it has to be used to pay down debt. One of the easier ways, if you will, to fund that bridge loan, if you will, would be to use that bond premium to fund that loan to the airport. It gets a little bit technical. We've got to go to bond counsel and see how mechanically that would work when the airport begins to pay it back, and that gets us deep in the weeds with bond counsel, and I don't have that answer yet. But that would be a way that we could do this. We could at least get the project started that way, Joe, and then if we determine that we couldn't use bond premium, then we are pursuing grants from the state and or loans from the state. We had a long discussion yesterday about that. The issue with that is that the grants are fine, but the loans from the state would probably carry a higher interest rate than what we would get in the open bond market. So, we're still working that math.
And the 2.2 million for Parks and Recs, can you share with the public what that's going to be for?
That is part of that, Joe, is for the expansion of Henry Parker. Some of that money is already in hand, and part of that is to also complete the renovations at the Purdue Stadium. And I think you recall that we're looking for about an $800,000 grant again in the state's budget this year. We think we'll get that, but that's by and large the two big chunks of money associated with that. They're smaller projects, but those are the two big ones. Any other questions? Comments? Yes, sir.
Regarding the services provided on these quotes, such as the work just alone with the Wicomico County Detention Center, are the companies that will be providing these services local-based businesses or Wicomico-based, say, construction companies or contractors?
We have to competitively bid, and to the extent that we can, we try to attract our local contractors, but we live in the low bid world. We do our best. We do our absolute best. Yes, sir, Dave.
I appreciate the fact that you've got the Farron Creek Road restoration in the budget.
Yes, sir.
We were asking that you would consider for future also dam restoration.
Yeah, that, as I think we had discussed at the county council meeting, that's really gonna be a function of what the state regulatory agencies are going to allow us to do, first of all, and then what their requirements would be. And while we haven't spoken with this fellow for quite some time, when we met at site immediately after the washout, the bridge, dam, and safety director from the state, I forget what his real title is, but he basically said if we were to rebuild a dam, that the dam would have to meet the same standards as a public safety dam. So now you're getting quite expensive. I think we estimated less than $5 to $6 million if we did that.
It could have been 3 to 4.
3 to 4? Thought it was higher.
Yeah, we do add some fluff because we don't know what the latest standards are, but it would be expensive given we'd have to dig it completely out, put a clay core likely, and then dependent on the spillway, that would have costs. But yeah, I'd say at least 3 to 4, could be significantly more.
Yeah. I thought it was higher than that, but
Well, is there any consideration being given with road repair to how that would affect how replacing the dam would affect the road repair? If we did the road repair now, so that we wouldn't have to redo it if we did the dam?
that's an engineering question. That's a very good question. And what I would tell you is that we are having meetings with state officials, and those types of issues, I think, are going to clarify pretty rapidly in the next week or so. So we'd have a better handle on what we can and can't do, first of all, and then secondly, how we would engineer what we are going to do, given what future considerations might be. So, you know, that's a long way of saying I'll probably have better information for you within about 2 weeks. But our intent is to get a road back across that span. Joe?
One last question, being nobody else is gonna ask. The 13.5 million, can you break that down a little bit for the board then? Do you have a breakdown on that?
Did you bring that?
You know, they've got that little book that's in the office there.
I'll get it.
If you don't have it, that's fine. We'll get it to council meeting.
Well, while Wayne is doing that, let me go ahead. I've got here several copies. Now, we did receive David's response back regarding the Atkins Historical Trust, and we appreciate you sending that back. We also received one back from Mr. Suggs. Honestly, there's some questions that need to be answered first. Mr. Suggs has said basically he will let us have permission to rebuild it, but if we don't put a pond in there, he's going to take legal action. I'm not going to leave the county open for legal action if the pond's not there. And I have letters for everybody, welcome to have a copy of all of this. You know, I'm trying to be as transparent as possible, but, you know, if somebody's already threatening to sue the county, I've got to be very careful. So, but we also have the agreement too that was done in 2013 that some of you may have a question on. So I'll be glad to hand these out or come get them or whatever, but you're all welcome to take a look at it. But I do want to thank those, you know, we still have one more letter, Mr. Atkins on the hill. His property does abut somewhat to it. So there's 3 property owners that were concerned. And you representing the Atkins Historical Trust, we appreciate your letter coming back in. So we are doing what we can, you know, and again, we got a meeting coming up soon about this with the state agencies. I forgot, Weston, how many agencies are involved? Bunky Leffman set it up for us.
Yeah, I want to say it's possibly four separate agencies.
Okay. And they will tell us what we can do and what we can't do and the effect that it will have on the wetlands on your side. So that's all stuff we gotta be concerned about. So we're gonna do what we can do to make it work, okay? And if we can make the pond back, I'll be glad to do that, but if it can't because of cost and certain ramifications, then it's not gonna get back. But getting the road back is the first priority, and then we'll go from there.
All right, you got plenty of time? Okay, West Salisbury School is $4.2 million. I'm going to round these off for you. East Salisbury systemic renovations is $1 million. The Mardella Middle High School track is $400,000. Beaver Run renovation studies and planning is $825,000. Delmar systemic renovations is $1,650,000. The Mardella Middle High School systemic renovations is $569,000. Jersey Road S&G shop building is $478,000. Wicomico High School systemic projects is $200,000. Beaver Run systemic renovations is $892,000. Wicomico High systemic projects is $150,000. That's plumbing, sewer, and septic. Perrin Elementary systemic renovations, its roof is $320,000. Pinehurst systemic renovations, $35,000. Pinehurst systemic renovations and repairs, that's for HVAC, is $150,000. Wicomico Middle systemic renovation is $79,000. Parkville High School systemic renovations, its electrical is $1 million. Wicomico Middle systemic renovation lighting systems is $35,000. The Morris Street facility roofs is $267,000. Wicomico High systemic projects, that's HVAC, is $55,000. Northwestern vehicular access improvements is $150,000, and Fruitland primary systemic renovations is $92,000. Comes out to $13,481,887.
In the Beaver Run, money, is that including running water and sewer across 50? Is that part of that, or is that not? Is that somewhere else?
I've got to go to the project details on that.
Don't worry about it.
I believe they have sewer already.
They have sewer
They may have
there.
water and sewer already.
They've already got that across there. Okay.
I think they're determining right now, I think they're doing studies right now, Joe, to determine whether or not a substantial renovation of that school is appropriate as opposed to a replacement of the school. John?
Got a question on airport runway extension.
Yes, sir.
Is there a limit to the extensions that we can expect? I always seem to see something, we're always extending the runways for one jet or the other. And so far, I haven't seen a whole lot of advantages come back to the county. Are we gonna put a limit, are we gonna say, we're gonna go to 8,000, that's it? That they can't provide us with the service that
Yeah, that main runway, John, runway 1432, when we take it to 7,000 feet, that's pretty much the physical limit for that runway, and it gets into a number of things. It gets into some environmental issues, and it also gets into the glide paths that have to be clear glide paths and obstructions that may be in that vertical space, if you will. So I think this 7,000 is going to be pretty much it. The interesting thing is that I think you all remember that Donald Trump landed here and took off here. He was in a 757, and that's a pretty big plane to get in and get out. The issue with the airframe that Piedmont is using is that it doesn't have a leading edge that deploys. It's got fairly short, sort of stubby wings that doesn't have a deployable leading edge. When it gets up It's very efficient, burns very, very little fuel, but getting it up takes a long runway. And I think what happened there, to be honest with you, is that was a product of the merger. And I think that when American Airlines acquired US Air, American already had this existing fleet of Embraer 145s, and they didn't, and logically would not have an appetite to change that airframe for one airport. And that particular airframe just needs a longer runway. Can land easily, but again, hot summer months with a full passenger load, and it's very interesting. There, we met with Piedmont 2 weeks ago. Their margins are such that they have to have a 90% load to make the flight break even. And that just astonished me. 90% load for that flight to break even. So when you get into summer months and you don't have the runway to get up with a 90% load on board, you're going to be losing money. They're not going to fly if they're going to lose money on the flight. So it is what it is. We have to deal with it. The thing about it is that Piedmont, the Piedmont presence in this community, particularly because of the maintenance hub and the corporate hub, corporate offices, injects a tremendous amount of money into the local economy. It's a significant amount.
$64 million a year.
Yeah.
Comes direct to that. One thing too, FAA will only let you go the distance that you have justification for.
Right.
We can't increase it to 8,000, that way we're covered for a while. We can only go to the 7,000 because that's what the need is for right now for Piedmont.
That's
So-
an interesting point that Bob makes, because when we extended the runway to 6,400 feet, the airport master plan called for a 7,000-foot runway. The master plan, which is the long-term plan, but the FAA would not approve an extension to 7,000 feet because we couldn't justify it with operations. They said, you don't need a 7,000-foot runway right now. Had this occurred, had this merger occurred and this transition to this airframe occurred earlier, we would have been able to have justified it. We could have done it at one time. It's just the way things work.
And interestingly enough, what is it, John? 10% is our total cost when we get done, all in, all done. FAA, MAA, all pay everything except for 10% of the cost.
Yeah.
So this $6 million will come back to the county.
Right.
And we will have, on our total outlay would be about 600,000.
200 more employees also.
200, okay, yeah. So.
So again, this is basically a cash flow issue. This is a bridge loan. For those of you in the real estate business, we're providing a bridge loan to the airport in order to get this done before the FAA payments will cover it.
I like that terminology, bridge loan.
Bridge loan. Maybe I'll get one of those for Barron Creek, a bridge loan.
Okay, is there anything else?
Anything else?
Well, with that, I appreciate you all coming out tonight. Thank you for your suggestions and your time. And again, I've got whatever you all may need for up here, and we'll keep you posted. I think most everybody's here for the Barron Creek, but we will keep you posted after our meeting with the state agencies coming up soon. So, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's good seeing you all.